Hi, I'm Andy Jones, Content Editor for Plaid's online education program, Let's Paint. Welcome to Color Lessons. Today we're painting a floral design titled Poppies.
For all of our color lessons, I'm using FolkArt's Pure Artist Pigment paint. It's been specially formulated to be very, very thick so that you can use this for a wide range of painting techniques. You can use it thin down for transparent watercolor effects, or you can use it with a palette knife for really thick, rich impasto work. The 20 colors of FolkArt Pure Artist Pigments are available at plaidonline.com/Let's Paint. And in the set, there is also a great color theory worksheet that is specially coded for you to paint on and reuse if you'd like to. And this is included in the kit with the 20 colors. So this is a great color theory booklet, and we also support this with an online video. I'm also using the FolkArt Pure Artist Pigment Mixing Mat, and this is a great tool to use in place of a palette. It's a reusable silicone mat, and it has spaces to put your colors out around the edge of the palette. Part of it is gray so that you can see exactly what value of colors that you're using. Part of it's white so that you can see how transparent a color is. It also has a quick guide for color harmonies as well as a little vocabulary list so that you can keep yourself familiar with color theory terms. This is a great product, and I think you'll really enjoy using it, and you can use it over and over and over. It cleans off beautifully and does not stain. For all the color lessons, I'm using the FolkArt Select Firm Bristle Brush. These brushes have been designed with a firm bristle synthetic filament, and it is great for canvas painting. It will stand up to lots of abuse. With care and cleaning, these brushes will last you a long, long time. They're perfect for canvas painting as well as any other kind of fabric painting that you're going to do. I think you're really going to love these FolkArt Select Firm Bristle brushes. They're available at plaidonline.com/Let's Paint in a package of 7 beautiful brushes. Some of you are concerned that you can't draw. Well, we've got you covered because we're teaching you how to paint, not how to draw. The color lessons come with a package of full color photographs so that you have a complete set of all of the photographs for all of your color lessons paintings. In addition to that, we have full-size pattern sheets. So they're printed out for you so you don't have to enlarge anything, and you can transfer the designs directly to your canvas. So these also are available at plaidonline.com/Let's Paint.
Today in Color Lessons, we're going to be painting Oriental poppies in a glass vase. And we're painting this on a clear primed linen canvas, which you can find online, and it makes your paintings look spectacular. The natural weave of the Belgian linen is such a wonderful surface to work on, and you don't really have to do anything to make your painting look great. I've transferred my design very lightly onto the linen canvas, and I used the printed pattern that is available in the Color Lessons Patterns Guide that you can find at plaidonline.com/Let's Paint. And I just used gray transfer paper to put my pattern onto the canvas. When you transfer the outside lines of your vase, make sure to use a ruler so that you have nice, sharp, straight lines. And we're going to paint this today using the FolkArt Pure Artist Pigments. And here on my palette, I've got a few colors that I've already put out. I have titanium white, I have dioxazine purple, and I have Prussian blue, and I'm also going to put out a little Payne's gray. And these paints are very, very thick, heavy-bodied acrylic paints, and they're formulated to have an extended working time, so you don't have to worry about your paint drying before you actually get finished with your step you're working on. So I'm also going to be using FolkArt Floating Medium, and I put it in a little portion cup so that I know exactly where it is on my palette and I can get into it without any problems at all. I want to show you how to hold your brush. Put the handle in the palm of your hand and then grip the brush loosely so that you're holding it at the back of the handle. This will make it a little uncomfortable for you, but it makes your painting much more spontaneous because you have less control than if you're holding it like a pencil. So to begin with, I'm going to dress my brush with FolkArt Floating Medium So I've just dipped my brush in the medium and then work the paint into the bristles of the brush. And I'm going to create a brush mixture of some titanium white and a little Payne's gray. And I just want to make a nice light gray color here on my palette. And we're going to come onto the canvas, and I'm going to just apply some of this next to the vase. And on this warm tone canvas, this gray color looks a little bit blue, which is a very nice color. So I'm going to just scrub some of this on, apply it loosely to the canvas. Then I'm going to pick up a little water on my brush, and I'm going to grab a shop towel just so I can have one handy in case things get a little out of control. But I'm just going to dab some water onto my canvas, and I need a little bit more. I'm just going to dab a little bit more water on, and in a moment you'll start to see that I'm going to develop some drips in my paint. And it probably takes a little bit more water than you would think it would to cause your paint to have some of these nice little drips. But they're really an important part of the painting. It makes your painting look very spontaneous. Now, here on my palette, I'm going to add a little bit of dioxazine purple into this gray color, and I added way too much there. So I'm just going to wipe the paint off on my blue shop towel, pick up some more titanium white, come to the edge of that, and just make a lighter violet color. Add a little Payne's gray to it to tone that color down just a little bit, as I want a purple color, but I don't want a color that's quite eggplant. Just mix the color here on your palette, and then we're going to come back onto our canvas. All right, so we're going to brush a little bit of our purple mixture here on the canvas, and this looks a little bit too light and bright to me, so we're going to come back to our palette. I'm going to add a little bit more dioxazine purple and just a little bit more Payne's gray to my mixture to deepen and tone down that color a little bit. So just adjust your color as you need to, and I'm adding floating medium so that the paint is very fluid and will brush on the canvas a little more easily. That's a little bit better. All right, underneath the vase, I'm going to rinse out my brush, and we're going to make another purple mixture here, which is going to be more dioxazine purple and Payne's gray. Almost no white, just what dirty color was in my brush. And a little more floating medium here. And I might add to my palette, just for fun, I'm going to add a little bit of the FolkArt Pure Artist Pigments Alizarin Crimson, which is a beautiful transparent red color. And we're going to add a little bit of that to this mixture just to give it a different tone than what we were just working with. And we're going to create a little bit of a reflection right underneath the vase, and I'm just going to put this transparent color on and pull down right underneath the vase. And you could see how we've got a nice different tone going on there. I'm going to add a little more floating medium to this. And just pull this down right at the edge of the vase. And we're not really creating a specific reflection, but we are just adding some interesting color here right underneath our vase. And I'm going to just carry this off to the right-hand side just a little bit. And I'm going to leave some of these marks showing. And then I'm going to take my blue shop towel, and I'm just going to begin to wisp up from the bottom of the canvas, just creating a little bit of movement in the paint. And I'm going to leave this alone, and when we come back later on in the painting, we'll add some more dark underneath our vase. But that's a good start to a transparent background. So let's clean out our brush again in water. And when I say clean out the brush, I'm just taking the majority of the color out, and there'll still be some that's left in there. And you can see that there's still some color in the brush, but I'm taking the excess moisture out on my blue shop towel. And we're going to create another gray mixture with some titanium white and some Payne's gray. and make this a little bit darker than that first blue-gray color that we put on the canvas. And we're going to be painting some background and some color inside our vase now. So I'm going to begin inside the vase here and just underneath the flowers where they are, or the leaf forms. And I'm just using the corner of the brush or the edge of the brush, and I'm going to go right down my transfer design line, keeping that nice and straight, and just scrub this color on, because I don't want a heavy buildup of paint on the canvas, but just enough so that we've got something happening underneath the arrangement, and just giving a little color to the inside of the vase. And we will actually be painting this vase with lots of different colors in there, and we're going to pretend that we're just painting all of these interesting little bits of light and dark and reflected light and reflected color, but we're not specifically painting our vase a color. We're just going to let some of this wonderful color happen here on the canvas. I'm going to paint a little bit on the inside of the vase right down here at the bottom, get the edge of that vase developed, and then really paint right along that edge. So instead of worrying about painting a vase, we're just going to think about where we're adding color on our canvas. So again, use the corner of that brush and just kind of scrub some of this color around to clean the excess paint off of your brush. And so now I've got some lighter areas here at the bottom, and there's a little bit of darkness right up underneath our floral arrangement that's in the vase. And we're going to come back to this kind of purpley mixture here. This is all very loose and kind of abstracted color. It doesn't have to be exactly like what I'm doing. In fact, it can be a little bit different, and that'll be lovely as well. I'm going to put some of this grayish purple color around this particular poppy and let it trail off to the edge of the canvas there. Colors are very transparent because of the use of our floating medium, and between these two poppies up here, I'm going to add a little bit of this purpley color and just scrub that out and let it fade off into the canvas, keeping this very indistinct. And then we'll add a little bit more kind of between these poppies here. And we may cover up most of this with some other colors, but I just want to get some color here on the canvas so that if we don't cover it up, we've already put something there so that our eye has something to look at in between our design. And then we'll put some here. Just going to even pick up some of that darker purple and just scrub a little bit of that on. It's a very casual painting using the corner of the brush and just a scrubbing motion, not trying to make this look like anything in particular. It's just some areas of color. And this is a very good start to our painting. I'm not really loving what's happening right here at this transition between my lighter purple and my darker purple. So I'm just going to soften that by scrubbing a little bit and just making that transition just disappear. So you could do that. We've got plenty of time to work with our paints. It's not near dry. And we're going to straighten that little line up there. And I'm just scrubbing and get that line a little bit straightened up there. Just kind of playing with the color that's here on the canvas. And you can play as much or as little as you want to, but this is kind of the initial stage of our painting. Now we're going to come back and we're going to add lots more color over here on this side, and we're going to make this side very, very dark. So I'm going to pause right now, and I want to use my heat gun to dry this and to set this so I don't have to worry about anything altering this as we continue to paint our poppies. So this is a good time for you to pause your video if you've caught up to this stage, and then you can dry yours and then start the video again, and we'll come back and begin to develop the darker side of our vase. My paint is nice and dry, and I use a heat gun to dry the FolkArt Pure Artist Pigment paints, but if you don't have a heat gun or a heat tool, you can use a hair dryer. It'll just take you a little bit longer. But once our paint is dry and set, then we can continue to build layers of color on. And so we're going to add some more darkness underneath our floral arrangement. And then we're also going to make the right-hand side and the bottom of our vase very, very dark. So let's come here on the palette and pick up some floating medium and some Payne's Gray. It's going to be our primary dark color for this. And I'm going to start right up underneath the flowers, or the leaves, which will be on there in a few minutes. And just adding some of this extra dark color right underneath our design. And I'm going to wipe my brush on my shop towel, pinch it between the shop towel so that you groom the brush back to a nice flat edge. Then I'm using the corner of the brush and I'm just going to begin to scrub and move this color down into the vase a little bit so that I don't have a harsh line right underneath my painting. If I want to, I can pick up a little bit of extra Payne's Gray and add that on, and then use the corner of the brush and scrub it into the painting. Make sure when you're working at the edge of the vase that you keep those outside lines nice and crisp and straight. So just scrubbing a little Payne's Gray on there. This is not something that you need to worry about having like perfect technique or getting something right, or there's no right or wrong to this. Every time you paint a vase and you do this kind of addition of color, it's going to look a little different than the time you did it before. You cannot paint the same thing twice. No matter how I try, every time is going to look a little bit different. So now I'm going to begin to really add some nice dark color over here, and we'll probably pause the video, dry this, and then come back and put another layer on. So this is just our initial layer. When you are looking at a finished painting, you don't know exactly how many layers of color are on there, so just give yourself the permission to add more layers as you need to. As you can see here on my palette, I'm mixing some Payne's Gray and alizarin crimson together, which is giving me a nice purple color. It is very different than the dioxazine purple, and I want something that's got a little bit more of a gray tone to it than just a bright, intense dioxazine purple. So now that I've got this color on my brush, we're going to come back to our canvas, and I'm going to very carefully apply some of this at the bottom of the vase. And do take your time. It may be easier if you're holding your canvas than it is while I've got mine here on an easel, but I am able to create a nice crisp line of dark color there. And you can see that this is really almost a plum color, and it's a beautiful color, and it's going to be a nice complement to our red poppies. So again, very neatly and carefully paint the outside edge of the vase. Try to keep it as neat and straight as you can. Don't worry about trying to be perfect. You will never be perfect, so there's no sense in striving for that. What you want is to create something that is pleasing to the eye, and that's really all we're trying for here. So I'm just going to put a bit of this paint on, and then I'm going to begin to scrub it out using the corner of the brush, and we'll play with this for a little bit. We have plenty of time with our Pure Artist pigments. They're not going to be drying right away like a regular acrylic would. You've got time to work with these, so you need not be in a hurry, which is one of the great things about these paints. You get to take your time. And again, this is just the initial layer of dark on this vase. If it doesn't get dark enough this time, we can certainly come back and add more dark color. Again, hold your brush so that the handle is resting in the palm of your hand, and then grip the brush. I often call it like a magic wand. And then you can just scrub with the brush using the corner and just create a nice irregular edge to your paint. You don't have to worry about messing up what was on there before, because that's all set and dried and it's not going to go anywhere. I'm just going to continue to add some dark color. And I need to mix a little bit more paint here. It's wonderful to brush mix these colors so that you're always having some variation in your color that you're putting on your canvas, so it's not always the same exact color. Some people think it needs to be. I don't think that's the case. I think you can have the variation and still create a very lovely painting. I'm just working this color onto the canvas, scrubbing it in. Always thinking about what does the shape look like. So I want to make sure that this is an interesting shape of color in the vase. It's not representing anything in particular. It is just color and it is just shape, which is mostly what I'm teaching you is how to make a color and to put a color in a specific place on the canvas, and that will make a painting. But we're not painting specific things. So I'm not trying to paint something in this vase. I'm just painting color in the vase. So now that I've got some of this dark established, I want to add a little bit of floating medium just to help me move that color around a little bit. So I'm going to pick up some floating medium, work it into my brush here on the palette. So you can see I've got a very transparent color that's showing up here. And we're going to put this on the canvas and just kind of scrub it around a little bit. And it's a little easier to move this paint that's a little bit more fluid than something that was very, very sticky. So just scrub some of this on, let it move around. Again, we're not painting anything. It's just a general idea that we have an interesting shape. And we'll talk more about interesting shapes when we're painting our poppies and our leaf forms. So that's a lot of nice dark color that we've got in this first stage, but you could still see a lot of the canvas showing through. So we're definitely going to come back and darken this in just a couple of minutes. But I want to make sure that while I've got this color on my brush, I'm going to add a little bit more floating medium to this. This is where things sometimes confuse people, because I'm going to add a little bit of this dark color up here, and I'm also going to add a little bit of it over here. So just making sure that I've got this same color scattered in a few different places, making a much nicer transition here on the corner than I had. And I'll wipe my brush again, pinching it between the shop towel, grooming it back into a nice chisel edge, and then I'm just going to soften this a little bit and just kind of play with it, have a little fun. If I want to loosen those edges up, I can pick up a little floating medium and just come and scrub that up. Make sure that I've got an interesting shape. And then scrub this out a little bit. And just for fun, we'll add a little bit of dark up here. So you don't have to do everything exactly the same way every time you create a painting. But before I play in this too much, I think this is a pretty good point, because I really do want to get this very dark and get that dark established on there now. So let's stop painting for a moment. When you've brought your painting to this stage, pause your video, we'll dry this, and then we'll come back and continue to darken our vase. Our canvas is once again dry, and so our paint is locked into place, so we don't need to worry about messing up anything that we've already painted. And remember, there's much more to come on this painting, so don't obsess about the way any of this looks right now. So we're just going to add another layer of darkness here on our painting, and we're going to start out the same way with a little Payne's Gray and some FolkArt floating medium, just picked up on my brush. Work it in there, and then we're going to add some more dark underneath the flowers, and you could see how this next layer is even darker creating a little bit more drama, because you can't have a nice bright highlight and a dramatic painting without strong darks in your painting. So the darks and the shadow colors are as important as the final highlights, maybe even more so. All right, so I'm just putting a little bit more Payne's Gray on. Then I'm going to wipe my brush. Again, pinch the brush between the shop towel to groom it back to a nice chisel edge. And then we're just going to soften this a little bit, leaving it pretty dark up under there. I can pick up a little bit more dark color and just really darken that. And you don't have to blend this till it's a seamless transition. I mean, I'm doing a painting, so I don't mind seeing some brush marks. I think that's a good thing to see in your painting. So let's make some more of our dark color here. Our dark plum color, which is Payne's Gray and Alizarin Crimson, brush mixed together. And Payne's Gray is a beautiful, transparent, bluish black color. And I just love that color. So here we go. We are putting on some very, very dark color. And I'm just going to move it and apply it with some strokes, stretching the paint out onto the canvas. Really making sure that this is quite dark. And the dark contrast between the vase and the background edge over here on the right is really creating some drama. And it's going to make your painting much more visually interesting for someone to look at your painting. I just went all outside the vase there, but let's not fret and panic about that. It's very easy to clean up. I'm going to take a number 12 flat brush. And I'm going to just use, for cleanup's sake here, a little bit of floating medium. And just work that into the bristles. And then we'll just go right next to the vase and just kind of clean that dark color off of the background. Like that. And the problem is gone. Very easy to correct a little problem like that. And there's no reason to panic or fear the worst. All right, it was very easy to clean that up because remember, we dried our previous layers so they're locked into place and I'm not really disturbing them. I was just taking the little bit of paint that spilled outside the vase, cleaning that off. Try not to freak out while you're painting. You should just enjoy the whole process. It's very therapeutic when you're painting, and it's quite enjoyable. Don't set unrealistic goals and expectations for yourself. Just enjoy the process and have fun with it. I think quite often people set unrealistic expectations for themselves, and then it's impossible to live up to those, and then you become frustrated. If you just go into the process of painting just to have a good time and to see what you can do, you'll enjoy yourself much, much more. And you'll have more fun, and that's really what painting is all about. The finished canvas at the end is just a bonus. So again, using the corner of my brush to scrub this color out, picking up more paint as I need it. And when you run out of color, simply brush mix a little bit more. Really liking this very, very dark color that's on here. And I'm thinking that this is going to be okay for right now. We can always come back and add some more colors to this We can alter our color if we need to. Just want to make sure that this is a nice, interesting color and an interesting shape. So my dark color comes down here a little bit. It dives back this way. It's carried out further here. Comes back not quite as far in this time. You can see some extra dark down here. So this is an interesting edge over here. And that's what I'm looking for, so that later on when I come back and look at this painting, this vase is interesting visually with the undulation of the dark color. It's something fun to look at. I'm thinking I want this to be even darker up here. So this time I'm going to wipe my brush off on my shop towel. I'm going to pick up extra Payne's Gray. And I didn't clean the brush out, so there could be some of that plum color in there. And I'm just adding extra dark right up in there. And you can see that we've got super, super dark color developing underneath what's going on in the arrangement. Okay, that looks good to me. I like the way that it's got an interesting shape to it. Paintings are all about color and shape. They're not necessarily about the subject matter, because we've got poppies that we're going to paint, and they're going to be the easiest thing in this whole painting to do. Let's move on to creating what I'm going to call not flower forms, they're leaf forms. And we're going to do the leaf forms with some sap green. So I'm going to put some sap green out on my palette. And I'm also going to go ahead and put out some yellow light. I'm going to teach you how to make a variety of greens from the colors we have on our palette and using a very dirty brush. So here on the palette, I'm going to mix a nice dark green color with sap green plus Payne's Gray. And because I'm digging into the Payne's Gray where I had some of the alizarin crimson, I'm already toning down my green color with a blackish color and a reddish color. So just creating a nice, dull, darker green color. And I need to put out some more Payne's Gray because I've just about used up what I started with. Don't try to be stingy with your paint. If you need more, go ahead and put more out. It's easier to put more out and go ahead and use it than to try to just scrimp by with what you already had out. So adding more Payne's Gray, making this a little darker. And I'm going to add a little bit of alizarin crimson to deepen and tone that color. On your color wheel, red and green lie opposite, and so they help to tone each other down. I'm going to take this dark color, and we're going to begin to develop the darker areas here on our canvas. So in and around the poppies, underneath this poppy over here, we've got some darkness. We've got some darkness that goes next to this poppy over here. And again, I'm applying this color on the corner of my brush, and I'm just letting it trail out. I'm going to carry it up a little bit higher. And I want you to think, I'm going to give you something to think about while you're painting this and before you start to worry about, quote, how to paint the leaves. If you were to look at an arrangement of flowers in a vase and there's something green in that vase, what would you think that is? Would you immediately think that that's some sort of foliage? Your mind probably goes there. And so when we're painting, we don't have to beat the viewer over the head with everything we're painting. People can connect the dots and imagine what things are without you being incredibly literal with your interpretation of what you are painting. So here I'm creating a darker shape of green, and I'm just letting it connect right down here to all this darkness in the vase. I'm going to create another area of green over here, and I'm just scrubbing this color on, stretching out the paint that's in my brush. Just creating a nice little area of green, and then going to do a little bit more right over here and let it trail off on the right-hand side of my canvas. All right, so those green areas are done, and then I'm going to do another little green area over here. Just kind of scrub some of that color on. And I've got some nice dark areas here and there. There needs to be a little bit more darkness over here. So I'll add a little bit more Payne's Gray and Alizarin Crimson to my sap green mixture here on my palette. And we'll add some of that really dark color right over here. All right, so I'm loving this dark right in here. I don't mind telling you all when something looks good to me. So I'm just kind of blurring the connection between what's happening up here in the arrangement and the vase. So it's all done by color and value. So my values are very close to one another here, so it's much harder to see the distinction between the shapes. But we've got some green stuff going on over here, and we've got some green stuff going on over there. And we've basically blocked in our leaf forms without worrying about painting a leaf. They're just some green shapes going on. And the less you concern yourself with something that's not important in the painting, like these poppy leaves are definitely not the focus of the painting. So while this green is still kind of sticky and wet, I'm going to take a little bit of my yellow light and I'm going to mix it into that dark green color that we just used so that I'm making it a lighter color, but it's also pretty dull. So if I want it to remain dull, I can add a little bit more Payne's Gray and Alizarin Crimson to this. So I've got a dull color that's a lighter value. And I'm just playing around here on the palette till I get a color that I think is going to look pretty good on my canvas. And we're going to come into this area here, and I'm going to create a little bit lighter shade of foliage in this area. And I've just dabbed some color on with the corner of my brush. I'm not trying to paint anything in particular. Again, it's just color and shape. That is the lesson of this video. It's all about color and shape. So here I'm dabbing some of this lighter green color on. Not blending it in, not trying to soften it, just making sure that it's got an interesting shape to it. I'll do the same thing over here. Dab some of this on, let the color just dance off the brush and collect onto the weave of the canvas a little bit. Just continuing to make a color here on my palette, adjusting it as I need to with Payne's Gray and Alizarin Crimson. I want a lighter green, but I don't want a bright green. Bright green's going to come a little bit later. So then we'll add some of this color here. And a little bit out here. Not too much, just enough to give a little bit of life to that area. And this, I think, is a really great time to evaluate what you have on your canvas. And don't do what I'm doing now. I'm starting to play in this, and I want to stop myself as best I can. Okay, I'm going to stop with this. This is enough for right now. I want to set and lock this layer into place because I'm going to add another layer of light color on there, but I don't want to disturb this layer. So let's pause the video once you've painted up to this point and dry this, and then we'll come back and continue to add some more lighter greens to our painting. Our foliage is dry and locked into place at this point, and we're just going to lighten this up a little bit more. So I'm switching to a filbert brush, which is a flat shape brush that has no corners on it. The corners are all nicely rounded, as you can see here on my palette. I'm going to take this color that we just used And I'm going to add a little bit more yellow light to this, creating a little bit brighter color, and adding just a little extra sap green to clean that color up. So we're making a lighter, brighter green. And we're going to begin to dab some of this on to create some lighter foliage areas. So dab, 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 dab. Not really painting a leaf or a leaf shape. I'm just adding some light color on. Here is where it's going to be more fun because we have some nice contrast between our light green and our dark color underneath. But you just hit the brush down and create a couple of little marks using different parts of the brush. And this creates that kind of little foliage trail that you often see in an arrangement. But just dab the color on using your brush and turning it over in your hand. I'm going to come back to my palette. I'm going to pick up some titanium white and lighten this up a little bit more. Come back to the painting and add some brighter highlights here and there. Not all over, just enough. I'm loving this contrast that we've got here. And I've just created that little bit of foliage that's trailing down across the front of the vase there. Lightening this up a little bit and adding a little bit of contrast over here. Don't overdo, and don't try to paint individual leaf shapes. That's defeating the whole purpose of a canvas painting that is kind of an impression of what you're doing, or a very loose, casual style of painting. So this is going to be plenty for what we're doing there with the highlights on the foliage, but let's go ahead and add a couple of stems while we have this lighter color on our brush. So I'm using the edge of the brush and I'm just painting in a little stem line and letting it just fade out here. We'll probably cover that up with a poppy petal. And then we need a little bit of a stem to come down from this taller flower. Just put it on there. Let it kind of curve down a little bit. And because you do need 3 stems, that's going really to nothing. But it's going to be fine just to have that little bit of dark green up there. And then just let it curve on down. Let that fade away. And then we'll highlight these stems while we have some light green on our brush. Adding a little bit more light color. And there we've just added a highlight on that stem. And we'll add another highlight right in here. Not spending too much time on these stems. Because again, this painting is not all about poppy stems. That's all you need to do. So we've got our stems in there, we've got our foliage established, we've got some nice dark green, we've got light green, we've got good contrast. So everything we're looking for in our foliage we have accomplished up to this point. So let's take a little break, and when we come back we'll start to add the local color to our poppies. Our canvas is dry and our foliage is locked into place. So now we're going to turn our attention to our flower forms, and we are going to establish the general color of our poppies, which is going to be red. And I'm going to use a 3/4 inch flat select firm bristle brush. And I've got some Naphthal Crimson on my palette, and I've also added some extra alizarin crimson. So I'm just going to create a nice mixture of Naphthal Crimson plus alizarin crimson, and to darken this up a little bit I'm going to add a small amount of Payne's Gray to this, because I don't want to start off my poppies being too light or bright. So we're making a dull red color, and we're just going to establish the shape of our poppies. So back here I'm going to put some of this on and just form the shape of my poppy flower. And the edges of your flower do not have to be perfectly smooth. They can have a little bit of a ragged edge to them. And we're just going to fill in this back petal of our flower. And it's more important to have an interesting shape than to have perfectly formed brush marks within the flower petal. Come out here and establish this petal that's hanging out on the side a little bit. You don't have to follow the pattern lines exactly. There can be some variation. Much more worried about having an interesting shape to the flower petal. And if I could get away with just calling these red shapes, I would do that, but it's more comfortable for you all if I actually do call them a poppy. So we've got some more petals to do, and I'm leaving a little bit of a cheat line to differentiate the flower petals. All right, so this is one poppy that's kind of undercoated, or one flower form. I've got another one in here, so let's do the same thing with generally the same color, and I'm just creating a brush mixture as I need it, and it is Naphthal Crimson plus alizarin crimson and a little bit of Payne's Gray. The outside edges, once again, can be a little ruffled or a little jagged. That's perfectly fine. Poppies are a wonderfully ruffled flower, and so they're open to a lot of interpretation. Okay, let's turn our attention to this poppy that's kind of hanging out over here by itself. So again, making sure that the outside edge has an interesting shape to it. The mixture is, again, Naphthal Crimson plus alizarin crimson plus a little bit of Payne's Gray, just to darken and dull that color a little bit more. This is not the shading color of our flower. This is just an indication so that we know that these flowers are red flowers. Should be very fun and relaxing to paint these petals. And I'm just bringing some of that down over the green where we had established our foliage. Pick up enough paint on your brush so that you're not having to work very hard to get the paint off of your brush. And we may change the shape of these flowers dramatically as we paint them. We're just getting some color on the canvas here at this point. Again, creating that brush mix of alizarin crimson, Naphthal Crimson, and Payne's Gray. And we're going to turn our attention to the poppy over here on the right-hand side of the painting. Blocking in what's going to be the back petal, and then some of these big petals right here in the front of our flower. Again, I'm still holding the brush with the handle in the palm of my hand, or the tip of the handle in the palm of my hand, and gripping it like a magic wand, so that I am forced to paint in a much more casual or relaxed manner. If you will do that, you will be much happier with your impressionistic flowers. because you're just forced to have a little less control of your brush this way. Again, we don't have to worry that every bit of the flower is filled in. We're just getting some color on the canvas, and that's all we're worried about at this point. Just making this flower extend down toward this green area a little bit more. And then I'm not really loving this light area there, and that's okay. Going to just make that area disappear a little bit more by extending this flower. And that's taking care of that light area back there that I didn't really like. Now that we've established a lot of red up here, let's come down in our vase and let's add a little bit of red down there. So I don't want too much paint on my brush, so I'm going to wipe most of the paint off of my brush, and I'm just going to establish a little area of red down here for some drama. Again, it's not anything in particular, it's simply an area of red. And we don't just want one, we want to carry that red around, so I'll put another little bit of red down here at the bottom of my vase, and let's give this red area here a little buddy of red like that. So just added a couple of little dramatic areas of red down here in the vase, and we have our poppies with their local color established, and this is a good place to dry our canvas and really set this red into place so that we don't disturb it when we create additional layers of color on there. So once you have your flowers blocked in and you've added your little bit of red action down here in the vase, let's pause the video and dry this. All right, our poppies are dry, and so this is set and locked into place. I'm going to add some shading to the center areas of my poppy, and I'm going to do that with a brush that I've picked up Payne's Gray on one corner of the brush, and I'm just going to soften that paint into the brush so that it's basically on half the brush and the other half of the brush is just kind of dry and dirty. So we're going to create the depression in the center area of our poppy, and it's going to be very, very dark and very, very dramatic. And so I'm just scrubbing this color on and softening it up into the back petals of the poppy. Just patting and dabbing this color on, creating the very dark center area of the flower. And because our red is dry, we don't have to worry about disrupting that, and we can create this very dark, dramatic center of the flower. Now this little poppy here is basically hiding behind a full flower that's in the front. So let's just come in here and darken this flower where it goes behind the one that's in front of it. Pat that color on, and then just kind of scrub a little bit to soften that edge a little. And my brush only has Payne's Gray in it. I'm not using any floating medium or any other color. And this is how we create this very, very stark contrast and very dramatic dark areas in our flowers. So right now the centers of our flowers are as dark as what we have going on here in our vase. So we're balancing the darks in our painting. And it's important that you have a balance of color and a balance of different values in your painting. So let's divide this flower from its back petals and its front petals. Just carve in a little center of our flower here. Pat that color up to soften it. We're not done with these flowers yet. We're just establishing the very dark areas of our petals. And along with your line drawings, you also have a nice photograph of the finished painting that you can refer to. That finished photograph will help you establish where some of your darkest values should go. And it's just nice to have a little reminder kind of where you're headed. So always try to keep that photo out and have that handy as a reference. Okay, so we have our dark areas of our poppy established. We can establish a little bit of a dark area here where one of our petals kind of changes directions. And I'm not going to make that quite as dark, but I do want to separate that petal a little bit. So we've got petals that are cupping up and a petal that's kind of folding forward on us. Now, while I've got some Payne's Gray in my brush, let's create a couple of stems down in our vase. So I'm going to use the Payne's Gray plus a little dioxazine purple, and I will thin this out now by adding a small amount of floating medium into this paint. So I got a very, very dark color on my brush, and we're going to create a few stems that go down into our vase. So I'm using the chisel edge of a flat brush, and I'm just creating a nice stem. I'll put another one on. I'm going to let this one break a little bit. Just change its direction slightly. And then we'll let that fade out into nothing. We'll put another one or two. Again, you don't want to make your career out of painting stems into a vase. So we're just putting a couple of those dark ones on over into our lighter area. We can make this one down here just a little bit broader, just by adding a little bit more pressure on our brush. And this funky little break here is going to add some visual interest down in our vase area. All right, so we've got a few things going on now, but before we stop and dry the centers of our poppies, I want to add a little bit more pizzazz to our vase. So I'm switching now to a number 12 flat brush, and I'm going to take some titanium white and a little Prussian blue, which we haven't really used much of any so far, and I'm creating a light blue here on my palette, and that's going to be way too bright for my painting, so I'm going to add a little bit of my Payne's Gray mixture just to tone that bright blue color down. Just work that color into the brush. We're creating a blue, but I don't want it terribly bright. So I'm going to wipe some of the excess paint off of my brush. Just gently wipe the brush on the shop towel. And then I'm going to create a couple of lighter blue highlight-ish areas on my vase. So laying the brush flat down and just pull to establish that blue color. And I went outside my line again. So a little floating medium on a small flat brush, and I can clean that up relatively quickly. Again, you've got time, so you don't have to worry about doing this in a hurry. Just keep cleaning up the paint, washing it off, cleaning the brush on your shop towel, and then just getting rid of any excess color that has slipped outside your pattern line. Just clean it up just like that. Never worry when you make an error like that. It is not a problem to clean that up. Let's add another bit of a highlight area here. Just stroking this light blue color on. I'm going to add a little more titanium white and lighten that up just a little bit more. And then we'll come back and we'll just dry brush a little bit lighter color on, creating a bit of a highlight area. Or if not a highlight area, then at least a light blue color area here on our vase. Adding interest and some new color here and there. So right now we've got a couple of friends right here, but there are other friends in our neighborhood. So let's put a little friendly blue over here, just a little bit. Just skim that color on. I'm going to take most of the color off of my brush by pinching it between the shop towel, and then we're just going to scrub in a little bit of a blue area right down here. And you see I'm just going right over those stems, and this is just a little shape of blue. Can loosen this one up a little bit too. It's not just such a line there. All right, now then let's take some more titanium white on our number 12 flat brush. Loaded one side of the brush with some white. There's no white on the other side of the brush, and we're going to establish a brighter highlight by setting the brush down, putting the bristles flat against the canvas, and then gently pulling down. So set the brush down and gently pull. And that's how you establish that kind of nice bright highlight. Again, pick up white on one side of the brush, no white on the other side. Set the brush flat down on the canvas, touch the brush to the surface, and then gently pull up. And now we've got a really interesting shaped highlight there that I haven't had to work too hard to do. And we'll put a smaller little friend next to that. So same way, we're going to set the brush down and pull down, and then we'll pull up. So that just creates that nice diffused bit of a highlight there. And because I can't stand this just being split right down the center there, we're going to put a little glint right across there. And this little bit kind of breaks up that stem line that we're seeing there. And then to my eye, there's just a little bit too much of a gap between that little glint over there and this one here. So I just have to kind of fill that in. It's taking more work than I wanted to, but there we go. So now we've got a nice bit of a highlight right here. And so that's really all the highlight that we need on this vase. I am going to put a little bit more of my light blue mixture down here at the bottom. I'm going to highlight right at the very edge of the vase. So start establishing this corner. And it's a little line of this light blue color right along the very edge of the vase. It does not need to be a solid line. It can be a bit of a broken line. In fact, it will be more attractive if it is broken and not completely solid. I'm strengthening it right here at the center and letting it just kind of trail out. I'm not going to carry it all the way over. That would be very predictable to have that white line come, or that light line go from edge to edge, but it's more interesting if it starts at one corner and then stops shy of the other corner. So now I'll take some just white on my brush, and I will establish a bit of a highlight right here on the corner. Set the brush down, touch to the surface, and then wisp up. I'm going to make sure that I've got that light right out to the edge of my vase. So there, that's a nice little bit of a highlight right down there. I'm going to leave that alone, and I'm going to put one more little highlight right here, almost at the bottom center of the vase. And I'm just tapping that on, creating that very, very light color. So we've got a little bit of a dark shadow underneath the vase, and it's dark inside the vase, but we've got this nice contrasting highlight right there. So we're going to leave the vase alone for a while, and our poppies are nicely dry, and we will begin to use our palette knife to establish some highlights on our poppies. So I am using a flexible blade metal palette knife. You can see just how bendable that knife is. So you want a good metal blade palette knife, not too long, not too wide. This has got plenty of room that I can maneuver it within my painting. A big palette knife, you won't be able to maneuver it in any given area. So try to get a medium-sized palette knife. I think this is a number 6 palette knife. We're going to load our palette knife with some Naphthal Crimson, and it's very important to load your palette knife properly. So I have some paint on the back side of my palette knife. None on the front, it's only on the back, and it's only on one edge. So be careful that you don't have too much paint on your palette knife. If you do, you'll know it immediately, and you can stop and correct yourself. But this is very important to only load the back side of the palette knife and only on one edge. So now we're going to come up to our poppy, and we're going to begin to brighten the edges of our poppy petals. So I would put my edge of the palette knife that has the paint on it right at the outside edge of my petal, lay it down, and then just kind of pull in to my flower. And you can see that the paint kind of sputters and dances off of the edge of the palette knife very easily. And if you don't have much paint, as you can see, there's almost no paint on there. So I could rub my palette knife all over my painting and I'm not getting any more paint on it because we've taken it all off there, and you could barely see that there's any residue left on the palette knife. But just knock that excess bit off, and then we'll load our palette knife again. Same way, only paint on the back of the palette knife, only on one edge, and not very much paint. Those are the key things to remember. So when we come back to our poppy, I'm going to put that palette knife right at the edge and pull that color onto the petal. And this gets easier the more you do it. It's just like any other tool that you have. You need to practice with it, and when you practice, you'll be able to control where your color is going. And I want to bring a little bit of this Naphthal Crimson down from the outside edge of the petal and come over some of that dark so that I have some red softening that super, super dark area. But it's not filling it in solid. It's just collecting right on the weave of the canvas. So for a smaller area, again, clean off my palette knife, and I want to put just a little bit toward the tip of my knife. So you can see most of the paint is at the tip of the knife and not down here, so that I can control where I'm applying that here on this edge of our petal. So not terribly difficult, but it does require some practice and some work to use your palette knife effectively. So you've got lots of bright red color up on the outside edge of the back of the poppy. And let's put some on the front petals of our flower. So again, no paint on the front of the palette knife, only on the back and only on one edge. And right next to our dark center, we're going to establish that edge of the poppy petal. And you can see what great contrast we have there. That's what we're looking for, that really bright contrast. And we'll do the same thing over here. We can wiggle and shape that a little bit and then soften it down into our petal. The important thing is to load your palette knife only on the back, small amount of paint, only on one edge. And then you can slide that color on and soften it down into your petal. But you see what a great contrast we get of bright red next to that very dark center. That's creating interest and drama in our flower. So let's come out there and get some drama going out there. And this is very fun and very relaxing. There's an expression that's often used in pre-K classes that says, you get what you get and you don't pitch a fit. And so that's a very appropriate saying to have in your head while you're using your palette knife, because it's a little bit uncontrollable. You can work to get the paint on properly, but as you apply it to your canvas, there's a bit of a risk to it. So just remember, you get what you get and you don't pitch a fit. The next one will be a little bit better, and the next one a little bit better than that, and so on as you practice and use your palette knife more and more. So again, picking up small amounts of paint on the back of my palette knife and only on one edge, and then I can just apply that color and create a beautiful edge to my poppy petal. You can spread that up and soften that and get that kind of loose edge. You can do the same thing up here. Just get that loose little edge going. And so it's more interesting to look at that than a sharp edge would be. Just brighten that a little bit. Then we've got this next poppy to work on, and we're going to brighten it with Naphthal Crimson the same way. Paint loaded only onto the back of the palette knife on one edge, and we will trail that on, creating a brighter petal right next to our darker petal of the poppy in the back. This is lifting one poppy in front of the other. I'm going to wipe my palette knife again, make sure it's nice and clean, only loading the back side and on one edge. And just creating that really pretty ruffledy edge and letting some of that red color trail on into that super dark shading so that even that dark part of our poppy is interesting to look at. Clean your palette knife off. Again, load with small amount of Naphthal Crimson, and we'll stroke some of that on. Adding some of that bright, vibrant red, and we've got that darker red underneath and this bright red going on top, making our poppies really, really bright. And move that color around as you need to, creating a nice edge there. Let's take a break from these poppies and come over here and work on this poppy on the left side of our canvas. So again, just troweling that brilliant Naphthal Crimson on our flower, creating that really, really bright edge. This is the exciting part of this painting, creating these really bright, bright red flowers. Making sure that the edge of my flower is interesting. So I can add a little bit more paint. That's a much more interesting shape than I had before. And you always need to evaluate every edge as you're painting it to make sure that it is interesting so that your viewer has something to look at and enjoy while they're looking at your paintings. Don't want to have them look at it and know everything about the painting in one glance. I'm going to push this paint on from the other direction this time. There we go. A nice edge there. And then just kind of bring some of that color down into the center a little bit. Now that's pretty interesting what's going on back there. So let's brighten up the front of our flower a little bit. Loading the back of the palette knife on one edge, and then let's create a nice bright edge right here at the front of our flower, separating it from the back. That very, very contrasty red and Payne's gray makes this much more interesting to look at. And I know when we put that dark red, that dark shading on the back of our poppy wasn't the most interesting thing, but now you see it contrasting here with this Naphthal Crimson in front, and it's so much more vibrant. I'm just going to let that trail off there, and then we will highlight some out here at the front edge of our poppy petals. And now we've got color contrast Now we had value contrast and color contrast there, but we've got complementary color contrast going on here with the red of our poppy and our green foliage. So this is a dramatic part of our painting as well. And for some reason, people always seem to be very fascinated by any part of the painting that is done with a palette knife. And this is a look that you cannot get by using a brush. A brush just simply does not give you these sorts of marks. You can only achieve it with a palette knife, and you're going to have to practice a little bit in order to really command the palette knife like you would a brush. All right, so I'm going to leave that poppy alone, and then we have this little guy over here, and we're going to do him the same way. We're going to begin at the back of the poppy, and then we'll work toward the front. Again, just using this brilliant Naphthal Crimson. It's a bright color there at the back, and let that trail off into our very dark center area of the poppy flower. Just something about these bright, happy red flowers that are so cheerful. So again, we've got that color and value contrast going on here. And let's make sure that it's really bright over here. Let's break that up just a little bit. Make that an interesting edge there. And if you need to, you can always pause your videotape and come back and look at something to really understand if I've been making a very specific point and you want to really study it. You can look and see how we've got this very interesting edge going on here. And then we'll add some bright red right down here next to our green, creating that kind of color contrast, the complementary colors of red and green, creating that drama. Again, letting that paint sputter off of the palette knife, creating that very, very interesting red texture on our flowers. And it's not necessarily a very thick application of paint, but you do have that bit of the darker red underneath color being skimmed over with this bright red color. So we've got this petal that's kind of hanging out here at the front. And we're going to get that color on him, the brighter red, because it is such a dramatic contrast with the green. That's very nice the way that turned out there. It's always nice when you get something that looks really good. It's always a pleasant surprise. Okay. Let's add just a little bit of palette knife highlight going on down here in the vase. I don't want much, but just a little bit of bright red right down here. So just traveled some of that on. And I'm not going to do it on these other red areas, just this one main one. So this is a lot of bright red going on. And I think the flowers are looking really good, but we're going to come back and we're going to add another layer of kind of red-orange highlights to this. So let's pause the video at this point. If you've brought your flowers to this level, let's dry this red really, really well, and then we'll come back and we will add our orange highlights. Our red that we just put on our poppies is all nice and dry, so we're going to turn our attention to our vase for just a moment, and we're going to add some more stems in there. So I'm going to make a mixture of sap green plus yellow light, and we're going to add just a little bit of white to this. So we're making a nice, bright, light green color because we want something that will have a nice contrast with the dark areas of our vase. I'm adding a little water to make this paint fluid so it's easier to paint with. And we'll see how this looks when we add a nice stem over here on the dark side of our vase. Stand your brush. And I'm using a number 12 flat brush, but you could use whatever size flat brush you're comfortable with. So we're going to make that stem come down. We're going to just give it a little zigzag. Don't be like me and overwork things. So let's add another stem here. Just something coming across our vase. Going to pick up a little bit more white on my brush. Make this color a little bit lighter. I'm going to highlight some of this where this stem crosses over another one. I want to make that a little bit brighter there. I'm going to highlight where this kind of has a bit of a zigzag here, creating some of those sharper angles, which are pretty cool looking. Then we'll just have another one start here. Let it break underneath that stem and then continue down a little bit. I don't think I'm going to do much more with these stems. Maybe highlight just a bit more right there. Plenty of stem action going on there. Let's turn our attention back to our poppies and our palette knife. And once again, we are going to load our palette knife, except this time we will be using red light. Loading the palette knife just on the back side of the palette knife, on one edge, and not on the front of the palette knife. And we will begin to add our brighter highlights here. And this red light is a much more vibrant red. It's nice that we have multiple reds in this particular line of paint so that we can have bright red highlights like this. And we'll pop some red on here, and you could see how we are making one petal rise in front of another just by stroking some of this color on, letting it trail off of our palette knife. Got a little too much on the palette knife, so wipe it off and then reload. Simply stroking this brighter red color on, creating highlights. We will still come back and put some very, very bright orangey highlights on, but these red light highlights really do start to make these flowers just sing. We'll put some up here. Creating that kind of broken edge that's much more interesting to look at. And this is using the paint as it comes out of the bottle. We're not thinning this paint down with any medium at all or water. It's just as it comes from the bottle. Got a nice edge going on there. We'll bring some of this bright red color down and let it just kind of trail out, creating those beautiful little marks on our flower petals. The beautiful red light color. It's very, very vibrant. Can add very small amount along this back edge here. So I don't want that to be as bright as the front part of our flower. Let's put our attention over here on this one guy who's hanging out. Let's get some of that brightness going on, and it's so much fun to put that on. And if you don't have too much paint on, you can really just kind of apply some pressure and clean off your palette knife, and you get just some of these nice little flecks of red light, which are beautiful and very interesting to look at. We'll get that interesting edge going up there. I'm loving this loose, broken edge over here. We'll continue to highlight on the front poppy petal here, making sure that we've got an interesting edge. And then again, if you don't have too much paint on your palette knife, you can create these wonderful little speckled or just where the paint is clinging to the weave of the canvas. They're just beautiful to look at. Stroking on a brighter highlight there. And we'll focus here on the front of our flower, making sure that we have some nice bright edges and some broken edges as well. So you can push the paint in either direction. This is much more fun sometimes than trying to blend a color in to create a highlight. Using your palette knife and just laying this bright color on. We'll come back over to this poppy here on the right side. And let's highlight this back petal so that it's raised up from the poppy behind it. There's a little bit of color that's off of the poppy petal over here, and it just kind of looks like a dab of red, and I'm perfectly happy with that, so I'm going to leave it alone and accent this front petal. We're not finished with the poppies just yet. Got a few more little tricks to do to them. Again, we're only using the red light at this point, creating these bright, vibrant highlights. And I think that's enough with our red light on our poppies. Let's take a little bit of red light on our palette knife and just add a little flick of red light down here in the vase, just for that extra bit of drama. And I think that's all that we need down there. But you do want something to kind of catch your eye and offset the red from the poppies, and this bit of red down here does just that. Let's bring our painting to this level with our red light highlights and take a moment and dry the red light, and then we'll come back and put our final bright highlights on our flowers. We have our red light highlights completely dry, so they are good to go, and we are going to add a small shadow underneath our vase to help it rest a little bit on our imaginary table. I'm going to use some FolkArt floating medium and Payne's Gray, alizarin crimson, and just a little bit of dioxazine purple. A very, very dark color. And we're going to place our brush right underneath the vase, and we're going to begin to tap our brush along, not creating a smooth, even line, but hopefully a line that's a little bit broken and a little bit uneven. So as you can see, we've got it done nicely there, and we'll continue it toward the left side of our vase. Set the brush down right under the vase, touch it to the surface, and then move it over, creating the illusion of a shadow. I want this to be a bit wider right here. So there we go. Touch the brush and move it along. All right, so that's much easier than trying to paint a shadow using a liner brush. I want it very, very specific right at this corner. Touch the brush to make sure that we have that nice dark right at the corner of the vase there. All right, so that's this shadow underneath our vase, which is making our vase sit squarely on our imaginary table. Let's turn our attention from dark shadows at the bottom to bright highlights at the top. I have some pure orange on my palette, and I'm going to create a mixture of red light and pure orange. It's going to be mostly pure orange because I want this to be lighter and brighter than the red light. And when we put this on our poppies, it's going to seem very, very bright and intense. And that's just what we need to light this painting up. And we don't want to put too many of these bright highlights on, but this area here on this poppy that's much more to the front on this side of the painting, let's just pop that color on, and you can see how bright and vivid that orangey color is. Pop it on and then leave it alone, and that's what we're looking for, that really intense bright orangey color contrasting with the red of our petals. And I'm loving how we've got this break in that highlight. It makes the highlight look even brighter because I can see some of the underneath red colors there. And that's what we're looking for, an interesting and very, very bright, vivid highlight. I'm going to take a little bit of pure orange by itself, and I'm going to stroke that on here, kind of at the bottom of this cupped up area of our poppy. And that's going to make that look like it's bulging forward a little bit. There we go. That's all this poppy needs. I don't want to overdo it. I want to leave a little bit to the viewer's imagination. And let's take some of our our red light and pure orange mixture. And we'll put another highlight here on this poppy. Just softening it in a little bit, leaving it a bit broken. And it's these broken bits that make this so exciting and make that like a bright kind of flaming orange highlight. I'm going to use just some pure orange here. And again, we want that vivid orange highlight right there, creating that very, very sharp contrast. And across the front of our poppy here. Let that trail off a little bit, and we really have that dazzling bright highlight on there, which is so fun to look at. We'll add some highlights down here on these outer petals. Be careful that you don't have too much paint on your palette knife. Just enough to lay that on and let that color kind of skip off and leave that little bit of a broken edge there. And I'm looking at these poppies, and they are so bright and so vibrant. I think we might want to put a little bit more of a highlight up here, just on this one little petal. It's not going to take much, but it will brighten that flower up a little bit. That's looking good to me. I think a little bit of a highlight is in order here, just to help tie this area in color-wise. You don't want to just leave a flower hanging. You want to make sure that it's incorporating itself into the painting. So by having this little bit of a highlight here, we're relating it to these other flowers. I'm looking at this and I think that this painting is complete. We've got an interesting looking vase going on with lots of very dramatic darks, some interesting red down here to coordinate with our red flowers. Our flowers are very vivid with nice contrasts between dark and light, and the petals have that broken highlight on it, which is visually interesting. The outside edges are a nice shape, and our greenery is very, very indistinct. So this has everything that we need to call this painting complete. Keep in mind that the FolkArt Pure Artist pigments dry to a very, very matte finish, and you'll want to revive the colors. The best way to do that is using a gloss varnish. Give your painting at least 24 hours to dry before applying a varnish, and then when you apply your gloss varnish to your painting, you'll really see the colors wake up. Thanks for painting poppies with me. It's so much fun to use the palette knife to create those really rich, bright highlights on those flowers.